This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Director of NIL Strategy at Florida Gators, Ben Chase. He discusses the principle behind NIL and how it's affected college sport, the long-term strategy for athletes and organisations, as well as how it may affect collegiate sports moving forward. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Right, Ben, I know we've caught up a little bit off air there about my love for, I'm going to call it American football, but football for you as well, and saying that you are actually the first football guest that I've had on. So I'm really excited. I've been a long time Dolphins fan that has been long suffering, but we seem to be on the up a little bit, which is good. But yeah, how are things in Florida? How are things your end?
Yeah. Football season for college, at least for Florida, is about 18 days away. We just weathered our first hurricane, a different Miami team, but it's funny. Like football season is also hurricane season in Florida, so getting one out of the way early probably will be beneficial because we got some of those loose trees down already. But no, I mean camp is in full. I think in the last 2 or 3 weeks. They've only had a few days off here for the Gators. It's where I work. It's so funny. Like the one day I don't wear Gator gear, I'm on a podcast, but it's fine. But yeah, the city is buzzing. You know, students are starting to trickle back. All of our athletes at UF will be back on campus on Monday, so it's fun to be here.
Perfect. And obviously, you alluded to a little bit there in terms of who you work for, but for people that maybe aren't aware of you or your role, do you just want to give us a bit of an overview of who you are, what you do, and maybe how you've come to be in that role?
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Ben, and I'm the director of NIL strategy for the Florida Gators here in Gainesville, Florida, which is about 90 minutes north of Orlando. For those kind of wondering, from like a locational spot. Yeah, so I work with all 21 of our sports, from lacrosse to American football to your football, our women's soccer team. Actually, they're the first team that'll have a game. It's this Friday. So they've had two exhibitions, and their first game is before even school starts for regular students, which is kind of crazy. And yeah, so a little bit about myself. I didn't go to college till I was 21, actually. But I did go to Florida for undergrad. Then I went to law school at GW, which is in Washington, D.C. So I'm an attorney. And I worked in NIL for a national company. And then I went on a crazy road trip to the most college football games in one season. So I'm a big college football guy, 77 games. And then during that trip, I got hired to come back home to my university to help build out NIL or NIL or however you want to pronounce it for our teams here at Florida. So I work with all 500 or so athletes that we have. And it's pretty awesome. And right now we're celebrating. We had 41 athletes at the Olympics that got 12 medals, which is I think it's like the 20th consecutive, or I don't know, 20 year, or I don't know, five consecutive Olympics that we've had at least 12 medals, which is kind of cool. And I think we'd be a top 20 country, and just based on that, which is kind of wild too.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you actually if you did have anyone at Olympics because the university that's closest to me that I worked at previously for like the last 12 years, they had quite a few swimmers that have come through, and it's always a fascinating vibe when you have someone that you see every day training who obviously goes
Oh,
away and then competes. So yeah,
it's
it's nice for you
insane. I
guys.
mean, like we have so many. I mean, 41 Olympians, and I think 18 of them or so are current Gators, right? So like currently on campus, and then we also Katie Ledecky isn't a Gator, but she's our coach, so she's in Gainesville too. And I mean, she's an all timer in swimming, and I'll tell you this: Katie Ledecky may be one of the fastest swimmers of all time, but she is the slowest walker. I've seen her on campus at like 3 or 4 times, and she's basically walking backwards, and I'm like, she must be just in energy storage mode. Because I do not walk fast, and I will be, you know, 500 meters behind her, and I'll just walk for 2 minutes, and suddenly I'm 300 meters in front of her. It's insane.
I'm a slow walker as well, so maybe I need to take up swimming to see if I can become an
Yeah,
Olympian
no,
for the same
seriously,
way.
it's mind blowing. but it's really cool and it's all inspiring because like our dining hall is for all of our athletes, and you'll be in there and you'll see Ben Shelton, who is an incredible tennis player right now. He just had like the fastest serve of all time at one of the big tournaments, and then you'll have Katie Ledecky, or you'll have Grant Holloway, who just won the gold in the 100-meter hurdle or 110-meter hurdles. Like you just never know who you're going to see, and they all, a rising tide lifts all ships, which is kind of cool to see. Like like some of our athletes will cross train together, and you're just like, you're an Olympian, you're an Olympian. And it's just so awesome.
Yeah, and that is one of the upsides, I guess, from the American system, having that high performance hubs, if you like, and people from lots of different sports and being able to collaborate together and I guess share successes, but also share methodology, mindsets, and stuff that allows that high performance feel, which is something that's a little bit different in the UK as to how universities perceived. But I think that's definitely one of
Yeah.
the
Well, I mean,
positives from
we have athletes from countries all over as well. I mean, we have one of your swimmers actually. I believe he's a Gator. Let me see. I'll have to pull it. While we talk, I'll pull it up because I'm pretty sure one of our swimmers is from the UK and he was in the Olympics.
You have to see which part of the UK it is to see whether I'm willing to claim him or not.
That's fair. All right. But yeah, I'll look it up while we keep talking here because it's going to
Yeah,
bother me that I forgot his name.
yeah, no worries. So I think for people that maybe don't know about NIL or probably like me that have a tertiary understanding of what that premise is and how it's come to fruition, can you just explain to us what I guess NIL actually stands for, why it's now become I guess a bit of a buzzword within college sports, and how we actually got to the point where college athletes, I guess, essentially are getting paid for their time, whereas previously they weren't allowed to, and obviously, I guess the main payment for their athletic endeavors came via scholarships which allowed them to go to university, and then they'd start earning money if they made the pros, which obviously we know for sports like football and basketball is an incredibly small amount of athletes that are actually capable of going on to do that.
Yeah, so NIL just stands for name, image, and likeness, and that's basically the marketability of you, right? Of you, Mike. So like, you have the ability to have this podcast and potentially monetize it. So in the past, athletes that were in college, the NCAA said that they owned their NIL while they were in school. So like you couldn't monetize your name, you couldn't have your name sold on a jersey, you couldn't, build your own business, right? So in 2021, the NCAA lost a bunch of lawsuits and they said no, like, you know, Ben Chase or whoever, they're able to monetize their NIL and then and profit off their own image. Like it's unfair for them to be able to do that. So originally, the original intent was, starting your own business, selling merch, doing meet and greets. But that quickly pivoted into this kind of roster management recruiting tool, right? That has now become, and now there's more changes to effect, but it's influencer marketing, right? With social media, TikTok, everything, like you are a brand, whether it's you're writing on LinkedIn or you're doing TikTok videos, um, and since 2021, all athletes can now be a part of that, just like every other student on a campus. Like it was unfair, the University of Florida was founded in 1853, and from 1853 or whenever our athletics started until 2021, you and I could be roommates. You could be an athlete, and I was just a regular student. I could make all the money off of my name, but you couldn't do it. And how is that fair, right? So like there was a fairness piece to it. But now, like some of our athletes are out here. They just want to have a few extra dollars to go out to eat. So like this is a ability for them to do that with coaching and training on the side. Like they do one-on-one training sometimes too. So it's been a huge win for them, and it's only going to grow. But on the influencer marketing side, not all athletes are influencers. Like so, you may have a big following just because you're good at football, but you may be terrible at posting on social media.
So I'm just looking as you're talking there, and I think to give people, particularly in the UK, that maybe don't understand the level of this. So if you look at the Big Ten Power Five here. It says Big Ten ruled the Power Five conferences with 845 million in revenue in the year of 2022. I guess so for people just to get an understanding of how much money that we're talking about that these universities were, or NCAA as well, were bringing in via TV revenue, ad revenue, sponsorship, all of that type of thing. It's an incredible amount of money that actually was going to the schools and to the NCAA that at the time the students obviously weren't getting any access to other than a scholarship.
Yeah, and I mean, you got to think about it this way: like universities have been able to build massive facilities, like we said earlier, these training facilities, massive stadiums. But like when you go to a Spurs game at home, like, are you going to watch the coach or are you going to watch the players? Right? So like you got to think like you know, and you know, soccer contracts are insane. I mean, I've seen them. Like you got to think like when I go watch the Gators play, I'm going to watch the players, right? I'm trying to cheer. I'm cheering for Graham Mertz or DJ Lagway or whoever. And for the longest time, you know, they were putting butts in seats and not getting any revenue. They, you know, you said early, before we got on this call that like, you know, this year the bowl games were on TV, you know, on Sky Sports or Sky NFL, and you know, those stations are making money off ad revenue from that game, right? Like people are watching that game for the game, but the players weren't getting anything. Well, they, you know, the old argument was they're getting a scholarship. Well, that's, I mean, you know, there's a certain tier to that where like, you know, they're getting scholarship, but you know, like you said, $800 million. Or if you look at the recent deal, the SEC, which is where the Gators are in that conference, I think it's like 1 point something billion-dollar deal per year for the rev share. So like you got to think, you know, so starting in 2025, revenue sharing will be a thing. And I think the pot per school is 20 to 22 million across all sports. And right now we're trying to figure out, okay, what percentage of that pie goes to football? What percentage goes to men's basketball? You know, is there, you know, Title IX is it's something in college athletics where like there has to be equal, you know, scholarships for men's and women's sports. Does Title IX fall under, you know, revenue sharing? Is revenue sharing only for sports that generate a profit? Right. So like, you know, we and college athletics, you know, we have a lot of sports that do not generate a profit. But because of Title IX, we have to have equal scholarships, right? So like football is like, hey, like we've been paying the bills and keeping the lights on for, you know, 18 of your 21 sports. There may be a situation where, you know, they unionize and say, hey, like, sorry, you know, women's lacrosse, you guys got to figure it out on your own. So there's a lot of craziness that could happen here shortly in college athletics as a whole. And sorry to like ramble on this, but I think it's something that, you know, your listeners and people should be aware of, that, you know, we're kind of in this Game of Thrones, you know, and learning what's going to happen. And it's, you know, the courts are in it. You know, there's a lot of people, agents, shady agents, and just all these different stakeholders that are buying in right now to see if they can get a piece of the pie.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And again, that does sound like a little bit of a minefield because I can imagine, you know, people going, well, no, we want more money with our sport so that we can, you know, get more into certain athletes or certain programs. And you guys are actually running at a deficit anyway. So why are you going to be equal? Whereas there's others going to say, well, no, want to build up and stuff. So yeah, I can imagine that being an absolute minefield, which I don't envy people trying
Yeah.
to figure that out.
And like we said earlier, you know, the US system is different where like universities are the training and breeding ground for Olympians, right? Like, and you know, like, you know, and for not just Americans, you know, like I said, we have 41, I think only half of them were from the US. Like we have, you know, all kinds of, you know, we have a freshman Indian long distance runner, and he's a superstar. But he's also like, uh, 5'3" or so. I don't know what that is in your heights, but like that, different metrics. But he's super short. But this kid, man, he runs like I've never seen before. And like if he did not have this opportunity, he'd be serving in the military right now in India. Like he was able to get a waiver to come to the States to train. And that could be something that changes here. And it could be hey, like maybe the U.S. Olympic Committee subsidizes the costs for on the back end for anyone who makes the Olympics because of that training, or maybe we ask other. I don't that there's so many things that could happen with the domino effect that is, monetization and legalization of our athletes being able to make money and the rev share part.
So if we look towards, I guess, the being able to make money side, obviously you mentioned that for, I guess, the majority of athletes, it's the capacity to earn a little bit of side cash to be able to go out and enjoy being a 19, 20, 21-year-old person. So obviously can't drink at that age for the majority of them, but being able to, go to cinema, go out on dates, go for dinner, etc. In terms of strategies for them actually being able to do that, what has changed from before NIL to now? So what were they allowed to do previously? Because I assume you were allowed to go and work as like a second job at a restaurant or something, compared to what would your average student be able to do now that's different?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think the perfect way to explain it is, so in gymnastics, they used to have like there's camps that they'll host, and like our best gymnasts could work the camps, but the camp could not promote that they were there, right? So it's kind of like a surprise, like oh, like we had Lian Wong. She was an alternate for our Team USA gymnastics team this year, and like before NIL, I think she has like 80,000 followers on Instagram, and they're all gymnasts. And before NIL was legal, she could get paid for a camp, but like they couldn't put her name on a poster or anything like. And now, like she has her own camp, the Lian Wong camp. Like, how cool is that? And like for perspective, oh, she's like Lian Wong has sold over 10,000 hair bows at like $20 a piece, over 1,000 leotards. Like she is her nickname is the CEO for a reason. So she's been able to build this company. She bought a house in Gainesville, like all based on everything she's done in the space, right? So like that's incredible. Before, like literally, if she was a gymnast in the last Olympic cycle, where 2021, even though it was the 2020 Olympics, she would have had none of that. Isn't that insane? Like a four-year window difference is life-changing money, right? So like that's really cool to think about, and she's been able to lean in and take advantage of that. Whereas before, and then I mean, even we have athletes, our soccer team or swimming and diving team that for them, they're just like they're just proud and happy to have their mom wear a shirt with their name on it, and they get like $3 or $4 for it, right? Like before, it was just penny pressing and doing it in the backyard and like making custom shirts, which is still cool. But, for, a basketball player, women's or men's basketball player to be able to go into the stands and see a kid with their name on. We also have trading cards now, like, and the athletes get paid to have their own trading cards. Like, and the kids will like come up and be like, hey, could you sign? Like, how cool is it that, we were the only school in the country that had soccer trading cards last year. We didn't have the best program from like a wins and loss standpoint, but our athletes got paid to have their own cards. And, now we got kids that will come up after games and say, hey, could you sign our, like, how cool is that? Like, so it's the little things and the big things, whether it's $3 for a trading card or, a few $100,000 for hair bows.
So if you then combine that to the top level athletes, so I guess the example that I gave earlier was Liv Dunn, because I think she's a really nice example, because I don't follow gymnastics and I don't really follow American college sports as closely as maybe I do some other sports. I maybe follow the football the most out of all of them, but I wouldn't say I follow it loads. Yeah, I'm aware of her and I'm aware of
Yeah.
her profile and stuff. So for someone like her, could you talk through I guess the transformation of what obviously you've explained what she could or couldn't do before. What does it look like for someone like her now that's able to exploit it?
Yeah, I think her and the Cavendish twins. Are you familiar with those two?
The basketball girls, is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So like those three are the perfect example of athletes that were influencers as well as athletes, but they couldn't monetize, right? So like Livy Dunn and the Cavendish twins had huge followings on TikTok before they could monetize their name. So the day that NIL became legal, like the Cavendish twins had a Boost Mobile, which is a phone company deal, and it was announced in Times Square, New York City, right? So like it was like it's like like how cool, but that's crazy, right? Like the fact that it took a day like to make like they obviously were negotiating it before, right? And so like the day that NIL became legal, they could do that. Also, you got to think on the back end with those athletes on TikTok. Once you have 10,000 followers and a certain amount of views, your TikTok can be monetized. So in my head, I'm like, did they monetize their TikToks beforehand? I wouldn't know. But there was a kicker back in 2012, 13, 14, who was for he played for the University of Central Florida, UCF, which is in Orlando. I think it was a backup kicker, and he had a YouTube channel, and it had like 30,000 followers. And he was like, the team said, "Hey, you can't monetize that, or you're not going to be on the team." And he goes, "Well, like I'm crushing it over here." And so he left the team. His channel went from 30,000 to 300,000 subscribers at the time, and he turned on monetization, obviously. And now I mean, his channel destroying. I don't know if you know how that is, but like goes around and does like funny stuff and with athletes, and like that was he made the business decision of I'm a businessman and I'm going to monetize my NIL. I don't care about being a backup kicker. I'll just become a regular student, right? And it obviously worked out for him. So, with these athletes that have these huge followings because they're creators, I mean, the internet is the great equalizer. Like, that if you put stuff out there, it's if you are good, it's not all like everyone's like, oh, they're just like cute or whatever. Like there's millions of girls on TikTok, millions of guys on TikTok, right? So like there's a reason that they were able to go nuclear, and that takes time and effort, and building a business on any platform is work, right? So like the fact that they were working their butts off before they could even monetize it is incredible. And then once Livy Dunn, I wouldn't be shocked if she has equity in Viore, which is like a Lululemon style clothing company. And she's done, she got a team behind her. She's an incredible gymnast too. I mean, to be recruited by LSU, for perspective, I know you're not. I mean, they just won the national championship, but like LSU is the top, 5 to 10 program in gymnastics every year. Florida is the same way. Like we expect to be in the national championship, the Final Four this coming season. Like that's like just the expectation. Like she has a few million on TikTok. Like we have 6 athletes that have 100,000 on Instagram in gymnastics. So like gymnastics is a huge market for monetizing and selling to your fans, and one of our athletes who's a rising sophomore, so her second year, she just created her own leotard line this week. She launched it, and right now she has about 9,000 followers. But like after the season, she'll probably have 30,000, and it'll just keep growing. Livy, she's got another seasons of college athletics where she's just going to continue to grow her brand. It's pretty exciting to see for her, obviously.
So when you look at your role then in terms of strategy, what does that entail? Is that strategy for the college as to how to recruit individuals that might be able to bring additional exposure to the programs as well as obviously athletic prowess? Or is that working with the individuals who are currently in the building to help them find ways to monetize or sell their name, image, and likeness to hopefully be able to create a sustainable income both in college and then obviously for the top ones, hopefully post college as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's a little bit of both. So, this Sunday, I have a recruiting meeting with some potential soccer commits, right? So, like, I do that with a lot of our sports, like meeting with them saying, hey, like, this is what the Gators have right now. This is what Florida can offer you. And when it comes to tools and access and what we've done in the past, like, I show them, hey, like, one of our athletes had a Nissan deal, or one of our athletes got XYZ deal, and you're in the same following as them. Once they're on campus, I can sit down with them one on one as an attorney. I can read their contracts and give them feedback on that. Hey, like I don't think this is the best term here, but what do you think? Like I don't say you shouldn't sign this. I say here are my thoughts. What do you think? Well, let's learn together here. And then when it comes to, outside, we have a collective, which, like I mentioned earlier, there's, athletes in football and some of our other sports are basically getting paid to go and leverage their following in the community with nonprofits. And at all the big schools, every school has a collective, and it's donor money that's being used and funneled to football or basketball so that they can, potentially recruit and retain talent. Like I don't know how much you and your followers are aware of like all the tampering that's going on. Like, there's coaches and street agents and collectives that are in the DMs of these athletes saying, hey, like if you go in the portal, the transfer portal, we'll give you XYZ, a car or $100,000, right? So like for us to, keep and maintain our current players, we have to have that slush fund of the collective to protect that and do deals with our athletes and also say, hey, like if you come to Florida, here are opportunities you have in that space too.
So I'm just making a note of that. So I'm aware of the transfer portal becoming increasingly clogged by if you want to say it in the harshest way, kind of I guess mercenaries being able to jump around with financial gain. But I think obviously for some, like let's call that as it is, if they have a good year at a smaller school and they're able to cash in, that's something that's going to change their entire family's life. So you
Yeah.
obviously also understand that as well. But in terms of
Yeah. And I'll say like, I think that's the part of it that needs to be, buttoned up. And it could be something where it goes European model where like, hey, if you sign with a Division II school or a smaller FCS school, and there's a contract there for hey, like it's a 2 or 3 year contract, and then you have a great year, maybe there's an opportunity for the university of a bigger school to buy out that contract and give a finder's fee or some kind of money back to that. I think that's how it works for you guys. Like, hey, like we're gonna buy out this athlete and give you guys more money on top of it because we believe that they will add value to our program. And because you built the foundation, we'll give. And I think that that could be something that happens. But there's a lot of things that need to happen, like unionization and collective bargaining and just a lot of different tiers of phases. But yeah, I think that's something. I mean, you can't. We have so Florida. Two of our rivals are Florida State, the Seminoles, and Miami Hurricanes, and they're starting quarterbacks this year. Both of them, they're on their third school, right? So like, you have to think like, normally you go to uni, you go to one school and then maybe you go to grad program at another school, right? But we have athletes that are on their third, and like some quarterbacks are on their fourth school, and it's probably because they may not be good enough to go to the NFL, right? And but right now they have enough value that they're going to maximize their earnings while they can. Like this is life changing money, and then they'll figure it out on the back end. Maybe go into coaching or whatever, which is interesting because like if you go into coaching, you may take a huge pay cut, right? And also another thing that's interesting is you know there's this whole like NIL is now like a thing in high school, and like to me like at if you are anyone of building a business, you should be able to monetize it, right? Whether you're 5 years old and unboxing toys on YouTube, or you're 105 years old and doing walk and talks in Times Square. But I do think there could be some kind of fatigue around coaching, specifically. I mean, at the high school level, where they're getting paid, I don't know, $45,000, maybe less, to train kids that are about to sign $1 million deals, right? Like that's like that to me is an interesting thing that no one's talking about. Is like, some of these high school coaches are, they're teaching geometry Monday through Friday, and then after that, they're getting paid a stipend of $15,000 to be the football coach. And, these kids on their team are about, signing $150,000 deals in 2 weeks, or like, so like I think there's something there that could be a big shake too, but I don't know what it's going to look like. I could be wrong, but like the mindset of that, like maybe, hey, like I'm excited for my kids that I'm training up, but there could be something like going back to street agents where every high school football coach is like, oh, you're not going to get my players unless I get a cutoff. Like there's could be a lot of things like that.
Yeah, going back to one of your original bits, so obviously the UK model, particularly with football, and this goes right down to the age of 9, just before we go into here, so really young,
Wow.
is we're tiered similar to what you guys are with D1, D2, D3. Ours are called category 1, 2, and 3. There's stipulations to be in each category or division. Some of it comes to the level of coaching. Resources you have, things like domes, etc., as well. But there's also a compensation fee attached to every player. So if you're a Cat 1 buying a player from a Cat 3, dependent on the number of years that he's been in the program, that would then come up with a figure that you would have to pay as a minimum of compensation to the club as a kind of, oh, you helped produce this player. What normally then gets cottoned onto the back of that is some additional fees for if they get a scholarship, which at our age is the top end of high school, 16, 18. If they make international appearances, first team appearances, and the money can be, added on,
Tiered. Yeah.
yeah, tiered on top of that. So that's kind of how that system works. Obviously, from our perspective, you get that with 9-year-olds through all the way to 18, 21. So it's really young.
Wow.
I would say
That's
there are some challenges with it, if I'm being really honest. But it the big teams will naturally chuck money at stuff if they feel like they need to. So your Chelsea's, your Man Cities have generally been quite active in that market, trying to find players that they can get from clubs in the local area.
that's incredible. I mean, 9 years old isn't incredible. I mean that and that like that's kind of I didn't really know that, but that's kind of where I see this. There could be something there, right? Where like they see this kid that is 6'5" at 11, right? And says, "Oh, we want to invest in this," right? So like, um, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I'm an eternal optimist, so I hope that whatever happens, it doesn't like dilute the joy that is the sport and the fandom. But we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of people that are exhausted with college athletics right now, but can't blame them because it's not. Well, it's not the kid. It's not the student's fault. It's not the athlete's fault. Like, you know, you know, they've been trying to figure this out for years, and the NCAA just kind of said, "Hey, like, here you go. You can figure it out," and you know, the toothpaste is out of the tube now.
And in terms of, obviously, I'm aware each state probably has different taxation laws and whatnot strategies around it. So how is that flagged up at the moment? Are you seeing schools that were previously quite dominant now falling behind because of their state income tax, to whereas other schools that maybe have no state tax allows athletes to go, actually, I'm going to make a whole lot more money if I go to I'm going, what if I think I know, but Florida is going to be a better destination for me than California that might tax me at 40%. Are we
Yeah,
seeing that?
yeah. So
And
I mean, I think that's something that like it's definitely used in recruiting, right? Like, and I think it's one of those things where, oh well, we'll use your California, Florida example. Like, in California, that $100,000 is going to look like this, whereas in Florida, that $100,000, you know, we have no state income tax, right? So like that means that you're only getting federal tax from at the federal level, so you're going to get this extra chunk, right? So like that's a and then we'll say like if the collective says, hey, we're going to give you $90,000 and it'll still be more than the California collective giving you 100. That's a win for us too, because that's less burden on our donors, less burden on our salary cap, if you will, that the collective has. So it's a little bit of all that, right? But yeah,
yeah,
it's definitely a thing. I mean, there's only like 5 states I think that have no income tax. Like, and then in other sports, you realize like when LeBron went to the Heat, like him, Wade, and Bosch, like took pay cuts, but really, I mean, because we had no state income tax, it was almost the same amount of money that they would have had if they stayed in Ohio or Toronto or whatever, right? So like that was a huge win, and that's why you see like Miami and the teams in Texas, they're able to go out and do a little bit more with that money compared to some other places.
yeah. Why people like Ndamukong Suh come to Miami and they go off elsewhere? No, I think it's a fascinating thing for the college students? Because as you said, and I think from listening to you talk and knowing what I've seen previously, I think this is going to take some time to actually figure out. I think that almost at the minute you've allowed the kids in the candy shop with no supervision, and everyone's just going crazy. But it will get to a point where donors get bored of paying that amount, and schools get bored of having to go and find a new starting quarterback every year because they keep changing via transfer portals. So I would imagine, and I could be wrong, but over probably the next 4 or 5 years, you might see a little bit of a evening out of this process where probably isn't as hostile as it is at the moment.
Yeah, and yeah, you could say like so, a lot of it's supposed to come in-house next year. So, a lot of schools and like in my old job, I worked with a lot of different collectives where we just said, hey, like, we'd go to these donors and say, hey, you only got to help us out for another 2 more years, maybe, hopefully more, no more than that. But like, could you think about it this way? Every school in the SEC has a certain amount of donors, right? Alumni that do well. And let's say that every one of the coaches was like, hey, we need $18 million to be competitive. Every school, right? So like, and that's just like what we need, right? So if all those schools all spend and raise $18 million and it's Alabama is still number one and Vanderbilt's still last. Like the donors at Vanderbilt's like, what am I doing? Why am I spending $18 million or like, and we're still this bad? Like, does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
that fatigue there is like, I'm good. If we're going to be last place, why do I have to give you any money? Right? Like it doesn't like clearly this isn't moving the needle. And if you say we need $18 million and when we really need $30 million, like that's and then we raised $30 million and so did Alabama and we're still last. Like, you know, that's going to be brutal, right? So hopefully when it comes in house, there is a little bit of a level playing field. But this we're in a really interesting place in college athletics because we're nonprofits that are impacted by winning. Like we're the only thing that's the only place in the world that's like that. Like our University of Florida, the Florida Gators are a nonprofit organization, but our results are driven by winning. Our coaches are like paid to win games, right? But like it's just so interesting, and there's such a deep dive there of different things, and like, are we still nonprofits in the new revenue generating world? I don't know.
So just so clarity for me, when you say in-house, does that mean that you're going to go and find maybe sponsors and stuff externally, and then your athletes get the pick of those sponsors in-house, or what do you mean when
So
you reference that?
so there's a huge legal settlement, House v. NCAA, and with that, they said, all right, starting in 2025, this percentage of your revenue is going to athletes, and it's about 20 million to 22 million, right? So most universities are like, oh, like now we have to go find another $20 million, right? And whether it's new sponsors, raising ticket prices, cutting staff. I mean, if you go, you can go look. Texas A&M let go of 18 admin about 3 months ago. And to give perspective, they 18 admin, they probably make $300,000, $3 million combined, maybe. I don't know for sure. So they just cleared up $3 million that they're going to probably have to use for, paying the athletes next year. They also, I think, same Texas A&M also in their contracts, their new contracts, there's like a verbiage about, hey, if money is needed for the athletes, this contract may be changed. And then you have there's a school in California, I think it's Loyola Marymount, that cut like 6 sports, right? So they're lowering their spending, right? So there's two options here: find more money or lowering your spending, or maybe is a combination of both, right? So like we got to go out and find $20 million, but the in-house part is so that the revenue generation will be from TV money, ticket money, different things like that. But like if we're going to still pay our coaches and staff, we have to find new brands that are going to be sponsors of the Gators, right? Like, Pepsi's the sponsor of the Gators, or UF Health, or all these. Like, we got to find more of those big companies.
Sorry, I was laughing when you said that about the admin because I know what you said about the salary. I'm going off Jimbo Fisher's contract here from 2021, so this is 3 years ago. But he's obviously the football coach at the time and signed a nine more than 9 million a year annual salary. So it always makes me laugh when people go after, they never go after the top one and go, Nick Saban, is there any chance that you could shave £3 million off of your salary so that these 15 people can keep their jobs? It's always going, right, we'll get rid of all of those, but we'll keep paying the
Yeah.
obviously
Well, and
the
I think like those salaries of those coaches, like they may go down now because they have to pay the players. Like before, it was just I think if you Google every state, the highest paid government official is a football coach, like in each state, or a basketball coach in Kentucky, right? So like that's so interesting. Like because I mean, the University of Florida is state funded, government funded. The Florida Gators are a nonprofit that's separate from the university, but basically the same. So it's just very interesting, like how that's all going to shake out. Like, and I know that I bet you there's coaches across the country that would say, "Hey, like I will take a $2 million pay cut if that means I get $2 million for my payroll for my athletes." Right? Like, there's plenty of coaches that would probably do that in a heartbeat.
yeah, and I was the next bit I think you've actually just answered in terms of the um, salaries being affected by all of this, I would assume that actually you're probably going to see that now in terms of the effects of all of what you're discussing going towards head coaches. And for me, when you mentioned the non-profit, that was quite surprising. I assumed that that wasn't the case. But if it was a non-profit organization, it makes sense why the fees of college coaches are so high because obviously they need to figure out ways alongside buildings and I guess actual malleable things. They need ways to get money out and paying what
Yeah.
they perceive as the next best head coach or the boatload of money is the easiest way to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And so that it's like, oh, we just upgrade facilities and give coaches and bonuses and stuff like that. Like that's just yeah, that used to be the way it is, and now that could change, right? But yeah, it's exciting time. It's a exhausting time, but it's one of those things where as long as we protect the athletes at the end of the day, like I think there'll be a lot of wins for everybody.
Perfect. So last question for me, which is if I were to jump back on a call with you in 5 years' time and say, right, Ben, you gave your prediction right at the end of this podcast, and here we are in 2029 or 2030. Where would you predict we will be at that point with NIL strategies, with the landscape as to how things are right now, as we discussed, to where you think they'll end up then?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we'll see a lot of press releases and stuff over the next 18 months about every football program hiring a general manager, right, to be like the salary cap roster person, right? And I do think that there could be colleges that cut sports and like lacrosse is a huge sport in the Northeast, and maybe you know that's just where it ends up. I wouldn't be surprised if football becomes its own thing where we have the SEC and we have all our sports in the SEC, but with all the realignment, the Big Ten has USC in California and Rutgers in New Jersey, and fiscally and like economically, it doesn't make sense to me for USC's women's soccer team to go play soccer at Maryland and then Rutgers and then back to LA. And like that's like a 4 hour time difference back and forth when they're also students, right?
Mm.
Like it doesn't like to me, I wouldn't be shocked if football spins off and then we get more regional realignment where it just does it's unfair for these athletes. Otherwise, there's gonna be a lot more lawsuits about employment, right? Like I don't know if you guys saw, but was it Brown University, which is in the Ivy League. Like so Ivy League schools, I don't know if you know this, but they don't give athletic scholarships. So if you go to Harvard or Yale, like, and you play sports there, you may be on scholarship just for getting into Harvard or Yale. But there was a case that said, oh, like these athletes are doing everything that triggers employment, right? So that's the other part, right? So like, is there suddenly athletic scholarships at those schools? Let me go back. In 5 years, I do think that football, college football, as we know it, will be different. It'll be it'll be a lot more professionalized. I don't know if it'll reach the UK model with 9-year-olds. But I do think staffs will be thinner because we got to cut staffs just to save money. I do think that the other sports, there could be ones that are just regionalized, like a lacrosse. Um, but I do think that the health of the game will be there, and it'll still be exciting moments. Because at the end of the day, like everyone loves sports, and that'll rise. But anything besides that, like I can't really forecast too much. I think to me, like the words NIL ideally will just become like regular words. Like right now, it's still triggering, and it's also like the scarlet letters of college sports. But I do think that, and there'll be some new edge that people are trying to do, and it could be every 18 months there could be something new that the NCAA says isn't allowed, but then it's challenged in court and they lose. Um, so I don't really know besides that.
No, I was just trying to type as you were discussing there. I didn't find that case, but I think that's a really interesting perspective of, yeah, if you are putting that many hours in terms of flying places, um, and hours away from home, are you actually an employee of the university because of that compared to just a student who's playing some sport? It's probably an easier sell if you're a football athlete who's getting prime time ESPN views and there's potential of earning revenue. But if you're a lacrosse player, or if you're a you know tennis player who's fifth in your school that's still making those journeys, that might become a bit more challenging. So I think it's a really
Yeah, and
interesting.
like we don't charter every sport, so like sometimes they're flying commercial, right?
Yeah.
Like that's but then in 5 years, football, you may not even be a student. You just may be a a football player for Florida Gators Inc., which is a subsidy of University of Florida, right? Like maybe it goes privatized and it's a minor league situation where you just happen to play at the University of Florida, but you're we sign you to a 3-year contract, Florida Gators Incorporated or wherever, right? Where like you don't have to go to school. You are here and as a professional athlete getting paid to win us games for that. Like that could be it, maybe in 5 years.
Yeah, that's it's fascinating. I think it's such a fascinating space because I can see why the NCAA didn't want to change it. One, from listen, their pockets. Let's not be around the bush. They want to keep as much money as they can in that, but it's also it has opened up a can of worms, which is like how far do you actually go with this? Now the realignment of all the different divisions. Um, I should explain for if there's any UK listeners, there's lots of schools that have lots of different divisions. Something similar to the European Super League is in essence is what happened. They've gone, we don't want to be in the Premier League anymore. We're going to go to this league with all these different schools and stuff in. So realignment of divisions is obviously a big one. But actually, how does that fit in with them being students? And if you do go down the route where they're not students, is it still right that it comes under the same names as it did previously because they're not university students and they don't have the heritage of a Tim Tebow who was like he was at the Gators, or a Vince Young who was a college legend, or Reggie Bush and people like that. So I'd imagine it's such a complex issue. So I can understand why the NCAA didn't want to open that can of worms, but it's definitely open. So it'd be interesting to see where eventually the dust settles and what it looks like moving forward.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. It's I think I'm an eternal optimist, glass half full kind of guy. So I'm just excited to see what happens next. And I'm lucky enough that I work for the university that I went to school for, so there's pride there. And if you ever come back to Orlando, you have to make a trip up 90 minutes and come to a Gator game.
No, for sure. I am planning with my wife. So last year we actually met some people when we were away on holiday who live in Tampa. So I'm
Okay.
planning on hopefully coming across at some point, potentially either tying it into the World Cup or um, obviously, I know you got Olympics on the other side, maybe tying it into something like that as well. So there is plans to come to the States. She's never been. I love it. So if I do,
Yeah.
I'll come up to a Gators game because again, I've never been to a college game. I have been to some NFL games over here, which has been amazing. I'd love to do some more American sports over there. I've done basketball. I've done hockey, but yeah, it'd be great to do baseball and football and stuff as well. But yeah, Ben, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for talking me through that and us through that. And I think a really good insight into the fascinating world of NIL, but also what that actually has meant for college sports and teams moving forward.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. If you get over here for sure, or wherever you end up going, like there's not many places like the swamp at night. Get you get you in some Gator gear, and yeah, hopefully I see you soon, and I appreciate you having me on, and hopefully this is the tip of the spear to have some more people on from college athletics and football, and hopefully your listeners, I added value for your listeners as well.
Perfect. Catch you soon. Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.